This is an influencer with 300,000 followers, showing the aftermath of being set on fire by her ex-husband, with burns covering as much as 90% of her body, and multiple deep knife wounds down to the bone. It's hard to imagine the pain she went through. 16 days after the incident, she tragically passed away from her injuries. People were shocked to discover that Jabao had tormented her for over 10 years. So, why did her ex-husband want to kill her? And why couldn't she escape this nightmare of an ex-husband? Today, we tell the story of the influencer Lam's murder case. On the night of September 14, 2020, an influencer named Lam started her usual live stream in her kitchen at home. In the middle of the live stream, a man suddenly barged into the frame. With Lam's scream, the live stream was abruptly cut off on the phone's other side, which was inside Lam's home. Lam's father and brother-in-law, asleep nearby, heard the screams and rushed over. And when they arrived at the kitchen, at that moment, Lam and the entire room had already been doused in gasoline. The man held a knife to Lam's neck with one hand and a lighter in the other, looking vicious and dangerous. Trapped in this peril, Lam saw her father and brother-in-law and screamed at them with a heart-wrenching cry, telling them to run quickly. No sooner had she spoken than her father and brother-in-law ran out of the kitchen, and the raging fire broke out immediately after. Afterwards, a loud explosion erupted in the kitchen. After the attack, the man fled down the mountain in panic. The injured father and brother-in-law had already called the police, and the man was eventually caught in time by the arriving police. This man was none other than Lam's ex-husband, Tang Lu. Tang Lu was also affected by the fire, suffering severe burns on his face and burn wounds covering 45% of his body. He was later sent to a local hospital for treatment, while Lam's condition was even more critical, with over 90% of her body burned, her entire body charred and blackened. Besides the burns, there were also 6 or 7 marks on his body from being cut by a knife, including a deep wound on his forehead that almost reached the bone. So then, what exactly was the grudge between Tang Lu and Lam, and what made him so cruel? This all has to be told from the beginning. Lam's real name is Amu Zhu. Born in a village in Guanyinchao Town, Jinchuan County, Aba Prefecture, Sichuan Province. Lam is a local living Buddha, and this is her affectionate childhood nickname. It means fairy. Like most children growing up in the mountains, Lam's family was very poor. Because of scarce educational resources and economic hardship, she did not continue schooling after primary school. She worked on the family farm with her parents and later took odd jobs in town. When she was 17 or 18, Lam met her former husband, Tang Lu, who was also a resident of Guanyinchao Town. Tang Lu was burly, with rough facial features, just like Lam. He did not have much education, only a middle school education, and made a living driving a van. Later, his family sold land, and his parents used the money to open a tea house. Because the business did well, Tang Lu stayed at home with idle time. Shortly after meeting, Lam and Tang Lu developed a romantic relationship. At that age of first love, they were deeply infatuated with each other and married in 2009, later having a firstborn son. But shortly after the marriage, Lam's sister Zhuoma noticed that her sister often had redness and swelling on her face, and some bruises on her body. Whenever asked, she avoided the topic, only once telling her sister that her husband had slapped her. In fact, at this time Lam was often abused by Tang Lu. Gradually, her maternal family also became aware of Lam's situation, but Lam's father was taciturn and reserved, and dared not interfere in these matters. Fortunately, her mother's personality was the complete opposite. Knowing her daughter had been wronged, she would confront Tang Lu for an explanation, and Tang Lu moderated his behavior somewhat. But the sky can have unpredictable storms, and tragedy struck the Lam family. In 2011, Lam's mother was diagnosed with advanced gallbladder cancer. Faced with a serious illness, even exhausting all their savings, they still could not afford the chemotherapy costs. So, The mother had no choice but to wait for death at home. 1 year later, in 2012, the mother passed away. Her passing meant the backbone of the family collapsed suddenly, and it was from this point on that the injuries on Lam began to increase and started to worsen. But even so, Lam still chose not to divorce because she could not bear to part with her children. She also still harbored illusions about Tang Lu and believed she could change him. In 2016, Lam was pregnant with their second child, and family members advised her not to have another child. But Lam thought even if it was for the child, Tang Lu would still change. However, the child's birth did not lead Tang Lu to change. On the contrary, the situation worsened, and he no longer avoided family members. Once, during the Lunar New Year, Lam and Tang Lu went back to her parents' home together, and during the gathering, Tang Lu, for reasons known only to him, suddenly dragged Lam outside and beat her. Lam's eyes were badly injured from the blows. From high school, her hair was even pulled out in patches. And facing the tall and strong Tang Lu, no one in her family dared to stop him. Sometimes the small and thin father would even tremble in fear. Tang Lu was an outright control freak. Regarding Lam going back to her parents' home, it was absolutely forbidden in his eyes. Even if Lam insisted on going once, Tang Lu would insist on going along, not to mention staying overnight at her parents' home. Some people say, if Lam had divorced Tang Lu in time, perhaps these tragedies could have been avoided. But in fact, the two children had long become the shackle that bound this mother. The children were still very young, and she was worried about her free time during the day, so she relied on going up the mountain to collect some medicinal herbs to dry and sell. In 2018, Lam created a Douyin account. She started learning how to post videos, sharing her trips to the mountains to pick herbs and some remade internet skits, and gradually she began to attract viewers. From the videos, it's easy to see that although Lam's living conditions were tight, her facial features were very generous, and because she was simple and pure, truly beautiful, she gained many fans. Although on the internet, Lam appeared quite optimistic, but the shadow of domestic violence always hung over her real life. In March of 2020, Tang Lu lost money playing cards online and was in a bad mood, so he chose to beat Lam to vent his anger. He picked up a stool and smashed Lam's right side. This violent act caused Lam to fracture her right arm, and many pinch marks appeared on her body. Afterwards, she chose to flee back to her maternal home. This was the worst beating Lam had ever received. She felt that if she didn't divorce, she might be beaten to death by Tang Lu one day. So, she decided to take this brave step, and in March, agreed to divorce Tang Lu, keeping the older son and leaving the younger son to Tang Lu. Surprisingly, Tang Lu readily agreed. It was originally thought that Lam's misfortune would end here, but not long after, Tang Lu came to Lam's home with the younger son, and in front of the door, he knelt down and bowed heavily, admitted his mistakes, and swore he would never lay a hand on Lam again. But seeing Lam remained unmoved, his initial remorse turned into madness, holding a kitchen knife to the younger son's neck, saying, "If you don't remarry me, I will kill him." Faced with such a threat, no mother could resist. So, half a month after the divorce, the two remarried. But in the following more than 10 days, Lam was beaten twice again, and unable to endure it, she hid back at her mother's home. Later, to avoid Tang Lu's search, Lam stayed at various relatives' homes, during which Tang Lu kept sending threatening text messages to her, threatening if she didn't return, he would kill the children. Not only that, he even found Lam's sister, Jolma, and forced her to reveal Lam's whereabouts. After being refused, he punched Jolma in the face, causing a fracture in the left eye socket bone, and she was hospitalized for 3 months. Actually, Lam had reported to the police more than once, but before, she chose to endure silently for fear of losing face. But in these 2 years, whenever Tang Lu came to her mother's home looking for her, she would report it to the local police station. But the officers handling the case were helpless, believing it to be a family dispute and at most gave verbal warnings, with no other actions taken. Now that Lam's sister was beaten to the point of fracture, Lam made up her mind to completely cut ties with Tang Lu, because after hitting her sister this time, he might next turn to harm her father. Lam, who was not very literate, went to the county to have someone write a divorce petition, and the court ruled at the end of June. However, because Lam had no steady income, the court awarded both children to Tang Lu. Afterwards, he said, "If you want the children, don't get divorced." Lam did not give in. Although she didn't get custody of the children, the huge weight in Lam's heart was lifted. She also said she would work hard to earn money, and when her financial situation improves, she will bring the 2 children back. Since then, Lam became even more frugal. To make gathering traditional Chinese medicine easier, she simply lived up on the mountain, spending her days exposed to ultraviolet rays while working on the mountaintop. She only used baby cream that cost a few yuan, just to save more money. At this time, Lam's followers had already exceeded 200,000, but she chose not to turn the internet into a money-making tool. Not only avoiding widespread misfortune, she occasionally went down the mountain to livestream, also advising fans not to send gifts. After the divorce, Lam spent most of her time on the mountain with her father. Their home was a small hut made from plastic sheets and stones, and every 7 or 8 days she would go down the mountain to sell the herbs she collected. But Lam was not without contact with her children. She would meet with her children for 1 week each month, using the money earned from selling medicine to take her 2 children to the amusement park in the county town, which was the only time she was willing to spend money. Originally, everything was moving in a good direction, but it was all completely destroyed. On September 1st, 2020, Lam went back up the mountain once again. This time, she stayed on the mountain for 13 days, continuously sharing her herb-gathering life. On September 13th, she carried back a full load of Chinese herbs, pulling a homemade trailer fully loaded. The next day, she posted a video wishing all her fans well and started a live stream after 8 o'clock that evening. As the father and brother-in-law had gone to bed early and her sister was not at home, Lam chose not to disturb her family's rest and live-streamed from the kitchen. Meanwhile, Tang Lu was riding a motorcycle holding a half-meter-long watermelon knife in his hand, and also carrying 50 kilograms of gasoline, speeding towards Lam's home. Judging by the amount of gasoline he carried, he might have intended to kill Lam and her entire family, which led to the scene we saw at the beginning of the video. No one knows why Tang Lu did this. Perhaps he couldn't stand to see Lam doing well, or maybe he disliked that Lam had freed herself from his control. As his mind gradually twisted into perversion, he committed such a heinous act. While being taken to the hospital, Lam was still somewhat conscious, and she said to her brother-in-law, have the hospital give her an injection to let her die, because her pain was truly unbearable. Due to the severe injuries, the local hospital advised them to transfer to Chengdu for treatment. But what you need to know is, the round-trip ambulance fee alone was 8,000 yuan, which they could not afford, not to mention the exorbitant and distorted fees. Fortunately, Lam's case quickly attracted attention online, and in just half a day, her sister Zhuoma raised 1 million yuan on the platform. On September 22nd, Lam underwent surgery, where the surgeon removed all the burned tissue, equivalent to grafting a layer of skin. On September 27th, after being unconscious for 13 days, Lam woke up for the first time, but soon she fell unconscious again and still faced life-threatening danger. Doctors told Zhuoma that 1 million yuan was just a drop in the bucket, and Lam's subsequent medical expenses would exceed 4 million yuan. Moreover, her hands also faced amputation, but only 3 days later, Lam was declared beyond rescue and passed away forever. After Lam's death, her sister Zhuoma took over. She occasionally updated videos on her account, all expressing longing for her sister. On July 14, 2021, exactly 1 year after the incident, the case of Tang Lu setting fire and burning Lam to death was tried at the Aba Prefecture Intermediate Court, and Tang Lu was sentenced to death. On July 23, 2021, following the second trial and a lengthy appeals process, Tang Lu was executed. From this point, Lam's 2 children became complete orphans. They were subsequently raised by Tang Lu's father.